good morning. I am Allen County Soil and Water Conservation District, Allen County, Indiana, presenting this morning coffee and urban agriculture. We're going to discuss the importance of urban agriculture and what it looks like in cities around us. So my name is Mike Whirling. I'm a technical specialist agronomist at the SWCD, and I am a conservation advocate using restorative agriculture on my farm. We are recording this morning, so it'll be available later as it gets done. And please have your audio on mute unless you're talking, and you can use the chat feature. We'll be monitoring that if you have questions, you want to add things to it. I hope we have a lot of interaction with everyone. That is always the best way to go. Today we have Naeem Edwards from Michigan State University. I hope I got your name pronounced correctly. And Jennifer Nettles from Vincennes University. So let's get started with Naeem. Tell us about yourself.
All right, good morning. So I say it's like Naeem, pronounced like Naeem the dream or the word naive. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being on the call, on the Zoom meeting. My name is Naeem Edwards. Once again, I work for Michigan State University Extension, and my primary job is opening an urban agriculture research center in Detroit. And I will jump right into sharing my screen. So yeah, I'll be talking about urbanization, the value or benefits of urban agriculture, and I'll show a video about the work that I do, and then end speaking about perennial landscapes, edible forest, edible landscapes. So without further ado, I will share the video.
I would like to acknowledge the indigenous people who are on this land before it was colonized, before it was settled. The three fire tribes of the Anishinaabe people, the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. We do a land acknowledgement primarily to recognize that we were not the first people here. People have been oppressed, marginalized, and pushed off of their land, and we, all people, all American citizens, have a responsibility to reconcile and resolve the injustice that was done in order to be a part of the healing and restoration of not only the land, but culture and society.
Shot of.
You can just see my home screen.
Yeah, we're getting that the home screen. We're not getting on video. Sorry.
No, sorry. One moment, please. Better?
Now we got you in a pickup truck.
Okay.
So the rain garden is bordered with pretty much construction debris that was from the former school that was at the site. And I'm gonna open up the water filter just to get any settlement that might be in the system out. And we can conveniently spray that right into the rain garden. I was hired May 2018 to direct what culminated in the long-term lease up to 40 years of this land. The university would like the site to essentially fulfill 3 goals. Goal number 1 is kind of state-of-the-art, premier urban agriculture research. We want to create models that can not only be replicated and emulated in Detroit, but in urban environments across the country and across the world. Anything from variety trials, soil restoration, pest management, more economic, small business, cooperative models, food preservation. This is our first research plot. Essentially, the whole southern portion of the site is divided into 50 by 50 foot plots, some for research, some for vegetable production. Within this plot, 2 University of Michigan graduate students are doing a biochar research experiment. Biochar is essentially charcoal. It's a organic material like wood that is burned in a controlled way.
Dirt is made up of lots of different size particles. Here there's a large wood chips, which is a coarse fragment. Then you have smaller things. This is now the biochar. This is a larger fragment, larger than 1 millimeter. And then you have things that, all this dust, that these are like a mix of sand grains and smaller biochar particles. Those are less than 1 millimeter. And so the hypothesis in this project is that those 2 different sizes have different functions for the receiving soil, depending on the average soil particle size.
Aside from the urban agriculture aspect, the university simply wants to be more present in the social and engagement of people of Detroit. So through Michigan State University Extension, we're offering programs in home ownership, financial management, mental health, youth mentorship, robotics, music, kind of outdoor education, outdoor recreation, archery. We want to use the space in the land to be an attractive, aesthetically pleasing, engaging recreational space so people can come here for exercise, to walk their dogs, to find a place of respite or peace, and then hopefully be able to just walk through the site and learn on their own without having the necessarily formal or structured programs here. Just through my own life experiences, I have come to realize that agriculture is potentially the closest thing to a silver bullet for addressing economic, cultural, educational, ecological issues. So from climate change to poverty, hunger, food access, agriculture is kind of the foundation of what creates stable and vibrant societies. And we do that primarily through changing how people relate to and access food. So one of my personal goals is to just develop the space in a way that is mindful not only of how we engage the community of humans, but also how we engage the insects, the birds, the microfauna in the soil, the fungi. We want to create a space that's literally welcoming and inclusive to everyone and everything. Birds can be great pest managers, but they're also just wonderful things to look at sometimes. So, part of managing a healthy and biodiverse site is feeding the local birdies. A part of the issue historically with agriculture is throughout the 20th century, it became very industrial, and that played a role in separating people from even knowing how food grows and where it comes from. So in addition to the research aspects, a part of the site being based in a neighborhood based in the city of Detroit is simply creating an opportunity for people to come and witness how corn grows, how tomatoes grow, how you harvest them, what it takes environmentally from water and carbon dioxide and sunlight and healthy soil to producing good food, as well as just transforming people's connection to a tomato is something I could grow in my yard, I could grow at my house, I could potentially grow indoors. It's not something that I have to earn money to purchase at a store or even a farmer's market. And then through transforming people's relationship with food, we're also creating space for people to share food. And it's saying, hey, I grew 5 tomato plants. These 5 tomato plants gave me more tomatoes than I could eat in a day or a week. And now rather than throw those things away, I'm sharing this with my neighbor, and I'm creating space and time and opportunities to share gifts, to share time, to have conversations, to share knowledge. it's kind of this integrated, holistic approach to building community. We have a lot of community support. I would say the spectrum ranges from people who say, I don't care what you guys do here, I'm just happy to see something being done here. People are excited to see activity. They're excited to see flowers and people, being productive, using their bodies. Just last week, I was really touched. 2 kids had walked by. They were a brother and sister, age 11 and 13. They lived 3 houses down. They had just come up to me and said, hey, mister, can we come and help you sometime? And that, I think of people doing outreach for volunteer days and having to broadcast things on social media. And it's exciting, it's honorable, it's touching that children, pretty much young teens, preteens, passing by were interested in helping out here. It's not a playground, there's not video games, there's not even internet at the site currently, and they wanted to come and put some energy into moving stuff around. For me, in 5 years or 10 years, I would really like to see potentially hundreds of people passing by or moving through the site on a weekly basis. Either you're coming here just to have a picnic or eat outdoors. You're coming here because you know that a certain class of interest to you has been scheduled. Or you're coming here because you know that you're gonna see a monarch butterfly, or you're gonna see bees, you're gonna see hummingbirds, or something that you don't necessarily get to see either in Detroit or at your home. So I'm very mindful of how not only myself, but everyone who comes here has an opportunity for stewardship, an opportunity for a substantial or meaningful experience. Even just today, I went to the MSU Detroit Partnership for Food Learning and Innovation, and just being there, I felt like I was relieved of stress. Just being there, I feel like I can go home more joyful, more happy, more proud to be a resident in this neighborhood, to be someone who is engaged in my community. And you're coming here because something about the space gives you energy, gives you purpose, gives you meaning, and also feel like they're connected to not only their community and one another, but to Michigan State and Detroit as a whole.
All right. Hope you guys enjoyed our video. That was made or produced last fall, 2020. So we've also made a lot of progress this year as well. And looking forward to continued growth. Now I will transition to my slideshow and our first topic. Share screen again. Okay, so urbanization. I think one of the most ironic things about extension, and I'm pretty sure most folks on the call may be familiar with cooperative extension, but essentially every state in the United States has an extension branch, which is a component of the land grant institution in that state. In Michigan, it is Michigan State University. In New York, it's Cornell. In Indiana, it's Purdue. Extension services were established in 1914, which happens to be the year that the country was approximately 50% urban and 50% rural, with the rural population decreasing. But extension was designed to primarily educate and promote rural lifestyles and farming and agriculture in a rural context in the United States. So as you can see in the diagram or graph on the screen, since about 1914, the urban population in the United States has continued to grow and increase, and the rural population has continued to decrease. And this was also highlighted in recent reports about the 2020 census, that it's, of course, at the greatest distance between urban population and rural population that it has been in US history. That's relevant because this presentation is about urban agriculture, and it's growing more and more relevant in order to feed the urban population, to produce food in urban centers, which decreases, the cost of transporting food, the carbon footprint of the food system by having to grow food in remote places and moving into, these million people plus populations. So not only within the United States is the urban population growing, but across the world. And this is United Nations data published in 2010. In 1975, there were 3 mega cities, 3 cities in the entire planet with a population greater than 10 million. In 2009, there were 21 of those cities. And in 2025, it's anticipated that there will be 29 cities with over 10 million people. I'm trying to do some quick math in my head. 29 billion, no. I feel like about a quarter of the global population might be in the biggest cities in the planet in the next 4 years. Large cities shows a similar trend, 5 to 10 million. There were 15 in 1975, 32, and I can go all the way down the list, but essentially anything that's considered a city, 500,000 people or more, has been exponentially increasing the last 25 years of the 1900s, and is still growing, but not at the same pace in the 21st century. So this is essentially just building an argument around the relevance of producing food where people are, and not necessarily maintaining a system, a paradigm where food is grown in rural places, and then an entire infrastructure and system needs to be built around sustaining that. Although there remains an argument that many types of foods can only be produced in large scale kind of settings or conditions. But that doesn't negate the fact and reality that a lot of food can be produced locally and in large quantities. So urban agriculture has existed since urban centers were created. Humans, essentially agriculture, I would say, and I think a lot of people would argue, led to the onset of the establishment of cities anyway. Humans were evolving or adapting to create localized permanent communities. And in order to do that, they had to have a greater control and agency over food that was grown. And by establishing the stability of having a consistent food source, they could create other jobs and other skill sets. So carpentry, architecture, music, schools, education systems, hospitals, healthcare, all of that essentially developed on top of the platform of having a sustainable agricultural system. So in a way, cities have only become a part of our civilization and culture because of agriculture and growing food locally. So I just wanted to highlight some facets of urban agriculture. Urban agriculture, as I understand it, as many folks understand it, can consist of a wide breadth and scope of food production. It could be someone growing food in a windowsill, on their porch, a front yard, a side lot. The image on the right shows Ron Finley, who's a pretty popular leader in Los Angeles, who I think coined or is credited with coining the term of guerrilla gardening, which is kind of the philosophy or act of growing food wherever food can be grown. So there was like a lawsuit or something where he was growing food between the sidewalk and the curb, which is like the median strip on different streets in Los Angeles, which was against city ordinances. And he became popular for fighting that ordinance and that legislation and having that policy changed in order for people to be able to produce food on their own property. This is a photo from the Michigan Urban Farm Initiative, which is one of the more popular urban farms in Detroit. It It's probably close to 3 acres. You can see from the backdrop that it's very close to the New Center area, one of Detroit's kind of downtown commercial centers. And, you know, this is kind of what comes to mind when people think of urban agriculture in a more traditional sense, large scale or relatively large scale food production in an urban center. And then there's the more technological and advanced or technologically innovative urban agriculture. You have indoor vertical farms, which require generally a lot more capital, a lot more investment, a lot more skilled labor for people who are either constructing the shelves, the lighting systems, the water pumping systems, temperature control, humidity control, all that stuff. But this is also one of the facets of urban agriculture, specifically in cities that do not have a lot of outdoor or in the ground space. And this is certainly one of the sectors within urban agriculture, vertical farming, that is becoming more profitable and more popular as well in cities across the US and across the world. This is a rooftop garden in New York. So you might not necessarily have the ground or surface ground level space to garden, and you might not necessarily have the financial means to do a large scale indoor production. But in that case, if the building that you would like to grow on has the structural integrity to support rooftop gardening, logistically, the resources and materials to garden sustainably on a roof can be just a little greater. You just need someone to carry it up there. So rooftop gardening is also something that sometimes comes to mind when people think of urban agriculture. This picture in the bottom left is a photo from Detroit, a farm called Cadillac Urban Farm. And they had repurposed kind of material crates that were used at an auto plant that shut down. And then about a couple hundred of these crates were given to this nonprofit that only had a huge parking lot, essentially a parking lot that was about 100 by 300 feet. And rather than tear up the concrete on the parking lot, they just purchased a ton of compost and topsoil and then used those crates to grow right on top of this parking lot. So it's one of the largest food production farms in Detroit, and it's 100% kind of raised bed model based on repurposing materials from an auto plant. So some of the difficulties and challenges that urban farmers, urban growers experience are access to land. Land, of course, maybe more so in the time of the pandemic, has become increasingly expensive and in demand. Some cities, of course, have urban plans that do not factor in urban agriculture, and therefore land may be held and restricted for use except for commercial or residential or industrial use. And therefore agriculture is simply prohibited. Soil quality is also a concern. Our cities have a history of, pumping lots of chemicals into the air, pouring contaminants and things on the ground. And it's important to be mindful of what's in the soil. And that kind of goes with the next bullet point of contamination. I kind of mentioned policies and zoning as well with land access. Infrastructure. So water tends to be one of the biggest limiting factors for irrigating urban farms. Outdoors, you would essentially hopefully have connection to a hose or a fire hydrant and the ability to run water when you need it. Also, just beyond the farm aspect, there's storage. So having refrigerator, kind of food hub, places where food can be consolidated before it is either processed for creating value-added products or before it's taken to a market. Refrigeration is a huge issue. So every day you can't necessarily harvest something in the morning and then have the entire crop distributed to restaurants and buyers. We need more facilities and urban spaces where food that is grown locally can be stored sustainably. Cultural. as someone who lives in Detroit, you often hear people who have narratives of Detroit is the Motor City. The city was built on industry and auto innovation, and we do not want to see farms here. We left farms, in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s in order to come to Detroit to have industry jobs, blue collar jobs. And to see farms is, for some people, traumatic, for other people, just unattractive and not ideal for what they want their urban lifestyle to embody. So there's local level pushback against just kind of negative stigmas against agriculture in general. And then economic feasibility. There's a ton of models for how food is sold. There's nonprofits, there's for-profit, small-scale gardens. There are people who just grow food on their own or prefer a more off-grid or self-reliant lifestyle. And if you want to make a profit off of growing food locally, there's a lot of obstacles that need to be overcome to do that. It's very hard to pay folks and make a profit if you're simply growing vegetables. Okay, the value of urban agriculture. This is a photo from a community garden, and kind of right off the bat, a lot of folks will value the opportunity to gather human beings together to collectively do something productive and constructive. So community resilience, communities can be less susceptible to economic downturns, climate change. People can improve their health simply by localizing food and building activities around food production. Local food is known to be healthier, or at least maintain its nutrients or have more nutrients, because in transport, a lot of food items are essentially degrading from the time they're taken off the plant to the time they're on a grocery shelf. And when you can access it most immediately, that's when it's at its optimal nutrition value. Food sovereignty, and I think I get into all of these actually. So the ecological benefit and economic relief are two other components that add value to urban ag. The background of this slide has a photo of a home that was foreclosed on and the owner was trying to be evicted. This house was in a neighborhood that had a community garden, and because of the culture and community that was built around the community garden, rather than let that individual family be pushed out, the community kind of used the gardening space to both organize against having that person evicted, and then they also had kind of the resources to support that person and that family from preventing their eviction, simply based on kind of having a history of working together collectively in the community. The food that helped feed people decreased the cost that other individuals may have been spending on food, and then the money saved from that was also used to help reclaim the home. So there was some resilience in that manner as well, built around the community garden. And the other bullet points on here, which I had mentioned, interdependence, less dependent on income or dependent on the need to buy food at a grocery store, and then stronger ties between neighbors is one of the maybe lesser known or lesser valued aspects. Food sovereignty is the ability for individuals to control their food system, to exert some type of agency and autonomy over how they access food, where they access food, and what kind of food they have access to, whether they're growing it themselves or purchasing it. So urban agriculture allows folks to have more agency over the food system and grow culturally appropriate foods, establish food businesses, kind of galvanize the local and small scale economy. And then there's tons of ecological benefits. There's a lot of published articles and papers on how urban agriculture plays a role in establishing green spaces and vibrant green spaces. So in the top left is a photo from an experiment where an organization, Keep Growing Detroit, was researching how urban farms and gardens play a role in absorbing and reducing the amount of stormwater that runs into the sewage system. And the oldest organically managed and organically certified farm in Detroit, they were able to run a 24-hour rain simulation, which was about 6 to 8 inches of rain. 100% of the water from that simulation drained into the soil. None of it went into the system. So Keep Growing Detroit wanted to present the argument to Detroit city government that folks who have urban gardens should have a water credit or something that reduces what they pay for a sewage fee, with the understanding that if you are gardening in a way that absorbs water, you should not be paying a sewage fee because you have a net negative contribution to the sewage system. Urban farms also serve as great environments for birds, pollinators, beneficial insects, and mammals to persist in urban environments, which are often devoid of biodiversity. So there's another opportunity for that. And last but not least, the urban island heat effect is reducing temperatures, particularly in the evening in urban settings that are absorbed by asphalt and concrete from solar radiation. So you're increasing green space, you're often increasing trees if you're growing fruit and nut trees to reduce temperatures in urban settings, which is often something that can be a stressor for both the electrical grid and for human health. So with that, I'll quickly transition to edible landscapes and edible forests, which is something I've become really passionate about in the last 2 years. They are essentially spaces where people grow food. So that's not anything novel. We grow food in lots of places, including our gardens. But they are typically foods that are perennial fruits and nuts, as well as vegetables. Perennial simply meaning that they come back every year without us replanting them. Strawberries, asparagus, any fruit pretty much you can think of on a woody plant, and nuts as well. Next slide. And there are also foods you can typically eat raw. Okay, so these things can increase food access. You can incorporate edible landscapes into almost all settings. So essentially across the United States, we've decided to plant our streets and our parks with maple trees, oak trees, sycamore trees, honey locust, black locust. You can name a litany of ornamental and valuable woody plants, but there's no reason we couldn't simply choose to plant more edible woody plants in addition to or in substitution for these other trees. And that would increase people's access to food, because everywhere you go, you would essentially encounter food, maybe from the months of May, certainly in Michigan, the months of May to October, but in states like California, Florida, Texas, essentially year round, you could have landscapes that provide free food to people. And I am close to my 40-minute mark. So I will quickly wrap. I lived in Ecuador for 2 years in the Peace Corps, and that's where I kind of got my first introduction to edible landscapes. And when walking through the streets of the town, Zaruma, that I lived in, just walking down the street, I would see mangoes, avocados, oranges, grapefruits, zapote, guava, guayaba, guanabana, all these tropical fruits, just as part of the street. And these things would also grow naturally in people's backyards. And I thought to myself, why couldn't we do the same thing in our landscapes in the United States? Michigan, where I live, is the second most agriculturally diverse state next to California. Listed in the bullet points are all of the plants that grow perfectly well in Michigan. And there are also plants that we could grow anywhere there's soil, essentially. So my goal moving forward, both at the MSU Detroit partnership site, as well as in Detroit and across the state, is to really encourage and promote the planting and establishment of fruit trees and nut trees all throughout our cities. And then, of course, creating a system to maintain those fruit and nut trees, to harvest them sustainably, and to be able to provision or provide. So this is just a photo. There's a Facebook group called Edible Communities in Cities. They have kind of renderings and drawings of what that could look like. Here's an example of a residential neighborhood with a rooftop garden, front yard garden, and then some perennial trees growing in there. Trees also help, as I mentioned, with the urban island heat effect and sequestering carbon, feeding people, reducing poverty by deferring food cost or reducing food cost, and improving people's health. And then we can create jobs around preserving, storing, selling these fruits and nuts as well. So I will wrap up with that. Our Instagram, I guess, tag handle is MSU Detroit Ag. If you'd like to follow us on Instagram, my email is also on this slide, and I can post that in the chat if people would like, and I'm happy to take questions.
So Naeem, your passion and excitement really shows through. I really appreciate that. Can you tell us more about your lot? What was the previous use, and what's your challenges to move forward?
Yep, so there was a public school on the MSU Detroit site. That school closed in 2008. It was kind of ransacked, gutted, mistreated from 2008 to 2016 when it was demolished. And then 2 years after it was demolished, we began to kind of have increased agricultural activity at the site. And yeah, I think developing our primary obstacles are the soil conditions, which we've been working very diligently to improve those. We also have a soil management research project we've been conducting since 2019, investigating different cover crops and tillage methods that can be used to improve soil fertility kind of as quickly and as sustainably as possible. And then aside from the soil conditions, just being able to navigate and balance city government policies, MSU administration, community demands and preferences is something I have to be mindful of as we develop the site, making sure that you don't bite the hand that feeds you, making sure that you're adhering to how the city wants to see urban agriculture be developed, and being mindful of how we can be as relevant and as kind of trusting, in a trusting relationship with our neighbors, the people who live closest to the site. So that's a tightrope to walk, but I enjoy walking it on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, and there's always lessons and new challenges presented in that. One of the things that I've done for developing the site, since right now it's mostly just a one-man show, is this year I piloted kind of a subleasing project. So for neighbors who came up to me and asked if they could use a portion of the land, I've granted 4 different organizations and people 50 by 50 foot plot to manage on their own. And I've just been trying to figure out ways to leverage Michigan State University resources to support local folks who don't have access to land on their own. And that also takes responsibility off of me for managing a certain portion of the property, but also kind of empowers and gives people the ability to learn on their own, establish their own food businesses. One woman is doing like cut flowers. Another plot is being managed specifically for research purposes. The biochar project that was mentioned in the video. And then another partner is growing mostly annual crops, but also established some fruit trees, and they donate all of their produce to a local food pantry. So moving forward, we'll be looking into ways to allow local partners and stakeholders to have more access to the land themselves. And then I can just be someone who's more of a coordinator and not necessarily someone who's managing everything.
So I see we have a number of viewers watching us here. Anyone, please use your chat and give us a question or unmute and join in, because that's the best thing to do. I'm going to continue if we don't get any others. What about livestock, chickens, and what's your city do on that?
Yes, so Detroit has had an animal husbandry ordinance that has been kind of sitting on the table since 2014. City Council has more or less been afraid to approve it due to a portion of the population that is really averse kind of promoting agriculture in the city. So I think politically, it's not the best decision for certain council members who want to stay in their seats. Right now, it is legal for farmers to have bees. I think legally you can have up to 5 chickens, depending on how much land you have to manage them on. And they have to be, there's policies that say they need to be at least 50 feet from the nearest neighbor's house, and their coop has to be 10 feet from a street or a sidewalk or something like that. So there's all these kind of little nuances that also make it difficult. Despite that, there are some farms in Detroit that kind of were grandfathered in or are kind of covertly raising horses, goats. I've seen pigs, ducks, turkeys. I think that's everything. Maybe some sheep in the city, but they're pretty kind of off-grid, low-key about it. At our site, my short-term goal is just to have people bring livestock to the site for a day or two or something like that, maybe for educational purposes or for grazing. And I may try to convert some portion of my job responsibilities to helping try to push that animal husbandry ordinance through. But I'm also not too keen on permanently having animals at the site, as I would probably have to inherit their primary caretaker responsibilities. But I definitely think animals should be a part of the urban agriculture narrative. And it's something that I guess communities need to kind of figure out safe and friendly ways to manage animals, as well as ways to balance people's aversion to loud animals, the smell of manure, I guess the sight of animals and their tendency to potentially destroy other people's property are things that we just need to be mindful of as we develop policies that support it.
I come from a background of loving animals. I'd rather hear and see them than any other use. So we have a question here. There was a blue tarp in your video on your land. Is that to kill off the weeds? Is this also a till-free piece of land?
Yes, so the blue tarp was to kill weeds. And I just learned this past year that blue is the worst color for a tarp, because blue tarps filter out essentially what is considered bad light, and then all the plants underneath it receive optimal light for their growth. So unless you have cardboard or something under the blue tarp or on top of it, it's better to go with black, red, or just darker colors if you're going to use occultation, which is the technique of smothering plants with some type of impermeable surface. But yes, the blue tarps were intended, and we left it on long enough that that plants were eventually killed as well. We probably had that blue tarp over the land for 6 weeks, from maybe late May, close to June. As it pertains to till-free, we minimize tillage. I'm not opposed to tilling, but I'm learning that tilling should be determined based on the plants that you want to grow and the soil conditions that you're dealing with. So if you're simply going to grow annual crops that only take up the top 2 to 4 inches of soil, I think it's practical and more feasible to just simply put down topsoil and compost and mulch and grow right into that substrate. If you want to do more perennial or deep-rooted plants, tilling, or at least coming up with some, depending on the scale of your production, you also want to be mindful of the energy and time needed to put a field, small lot, a couple acres into production. Usually the larger the scale, the more rational it is to till with a machine, just based on the time and energy cost. But generally we do try to minimize tillage for the reasons of preserving the soil microbiome and benefiting soil biodiversity, as well as keeping carbon dioxide in the soil.
So how about organic? Are you going to move towards organic or kind of mess with everything?
I'm not opposed. I think most urban farmers generally don't go for organic certification based on both the annual cost as well as the requirement of kind of tedious or meticulous record keeping. So kind of the need to track all of that, it doesn't seem to outweigh the trust that you can have with your customer or community, and simply showing people that I'm growing things organically without the certification. You can see that, I can see that, and now we're saving money and time by not having to adhere to the requirements of organic certification. On that note, I'm also really interested in Demeter or biodynamic cultivation techniques. There's one organically certified farm in Detroit, and there was one biodynamic certified farm in Detroit that still practices biodynamic techniques, but they no longer adhere to those either. And at the biodynamic farm, which is called ROI Urban Farm, they have strawberries. You know, I've seen their strawberries. They're almost like 3 or 4 ounces per berry plant. They also produce humongous watermelons. They've been able to grow certain tropical fruits, and they just boast that it's because their soil quality is amazing, and they're growing in ways that other farmers aren't necessarily taking into consideration to boost plant health. So I'm thinking next year I'll put a little more energy into investigating kind of Demeter, DEMETER certification, as well as biodynamic practices. Certified naturally grown, I've seen those as well. And I've kind of, so I guess a short story about the development of the site. The year I was hired, we were trying to get the construction things permitted through city government. My second year, we just did a small plot to pilot the the urban soil management research. My third year, 2020, we finished construction of our first building at the site in February of 2020. And then by March, everything was shut down until this past June. So aside from growing plants, we were having minimal activity at the site. So now we're in 2021. This was our first real year of full operations. And even, of course, we're not completely out of the woods on the pandemic. So it's just been a really gradual process. But hopefully once we establish some norms for operating procedure, I can give more attention to pursuing different tracks or specific tracks for how we grow and develop the space.
How about farmers markets around you or vegetable markets? Do you have anything close by? Or are you planning on joining or starting something?
So we, MSU promised not to ever sell anything we grow at the site in order not to compete with local growers who are selling for their own well-being or business purposes. We're also located in one of the most urban ag dense neighborhoods in the city. So within the zip code that we're in, on certain blocks, as many as 1 in 3 houses has a front yard, backyard, or side lot garden. And then I would say maybe also 1 in 3 of those growing spaces is a business that sells food for a market garden, farmer's market, or straight to retail kind of thing. So I've tried to put more emphasis on the education and research, and then we donate all of what we grow to a local food pantry as well. So in order not to say, hey, this tomato or apple or whatever was grown at the MSU Detroit partnership site and potentially take someone else's business or customers, we've simply promised never to do that locally anyway. We may get into making jams or freezing things or doing value added products, which people currently aren't doing to scale in the neighborhood, but we wouldn't simply sell our raw produce.
Very, very nice. How about if you can stick around, we'll keep you online here, and maybe as Jennifer goes on, we can get into a good discussion also. That's all right.
I'll be here.
So everybody keep your questions handy and lay them on to us. Next, Jennifer Nettles from Vincennes University is going to speak. We'll just bring her on and hopefully we can come back to a discussion.
Can you hear me?
Yes, very good.
Okay, I think my computer's thinking, so. Well.
So while we're waiting for Jennifer, any other questions or comments for Naeem? One of my main passions or future here is cover crops. So I love it that you're considering cover crops, no-till and cover crops or never-till. I think the symbiosis is really going to be a great thing as we move forward in that.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of potential uses for them. And we're just looking for ways to inform folks how to make it practical and applicable. I was thinking I could share a soil joke in the meantime. It's, when does soil get rich?
I don't know. When does soil get rich?
Mother Nature makes it rain. Ba-ba-ba.
And how do you get rid of them when you want to plant?
I'll put some links to our MSU stuff in the chat.
I know on my farm, I am now planting into green cover crops without killing the previous, planting in them and then rolling them down, roller crimping them.
Oh,
And,
sweet. You use a tractor for the roller, presumably?
pulling the tractor, but I know the gardening, our local garden here, the Burmese garden, I really like to make a hand drill one. That's one they can push.
Mhm.
That's gonna be, I love to build also, so that's one of my goals this winter is to get them a thing. So are we ready for Jennifer?
I hope so. I'm gonna leave my video off in case something goes haywire. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Very
Okay,
good.
cool. All right. So like you said, my name is Jennifer Nettles. I teach the horticulture and some of the agriculture program here at Vincennes University. And we just started into this based on student interest and actually my interest as well. So I have to tell you or share with you the first picture I show all my students. And just kind of think about this here. So how many of you have eaten one of these? Probably most of you have. And just to kind of put this into perspective is when you've bought that cheeseburger, maybe it was McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, maybe you made it at home. But did you think of where all of that came from? The tomato, the lettuce, how it was grown, how it had gotten to the place that you had purchased it from, and how that process worked. Most of the time, we don't think about it. We just consume it because we're hungry, right? But just to put that into perspective, that's kind of what urban agriculture, I guess, is addressing. That's kind of where it started, originated, at least here in Vincennes University. Back before the pandemic, we were kind of interested in already what went into our food and how it was grown. But now even more so, I think people are more interested in growing their own produce for a variety of reasons. A couple other pictures that I like to share. This is from seedyourfuture.org. It's a pretty good organization that just wants to get kids more involved in green activities, being outside. And so nature never closes and no distancing required. Pretty cool just to think about that. So with all the new interests in gardening recently, it's kind of brought about several different highlights, I guess I can say. Urban gardening, these are some of my interests, I guess, in urban gardening, where this kind of started in Vincennes University and what I've seen in the last year. So I'm going to go through these points here just real quickly and share some other things with you. So the first one, just growing a self-sufficient garden. I think most people are interested in just being more self-sufficient, maybe, excuse me, maybe growing the overabundance in the summer and being able to can it for the winter or off months that are not in season. And what has been put into those jars, how it was canned and what's in it. Being able to use the scraps maybe to compost, to add that nutrient and organic matter to the soil, and in turn improving soil health, like we've already talked about before. Some people have been interested in collecting rainwater. The only thing here is you have that first flush that you have, depending on your rooftop, that you have that first flush because that might have some things that you don't want to water your garden with. So growing a self-sufficient garden, which kind of also goes back to, wartime, World War II. I thought this was pretty interesting that 40% of the vegetables were produced during World War II in 20 million victory gardens. And I think that's kind of coming back. So growing vitamins at your kitchen door. This is Indianapolis. You can kind of see an up close view of Indianapolis and the surrounding area. So we talk about food deserts. And that's another reason why maybe urban agriculture has become a little more prevalent, is that there are areas where people don't have access to fresh fruits and vegetables. And to be a food desert, I think it's 20 or 10 miles in the city, without access to fresh fruits and vegetables or the variety of, and then 20 miles in the rural areas. So that they do exist and they're here. So to maybe help with that, to get those fresh fruits and vegetables closer to the people who need to consume them. And, you know, when you walk through the grocery store, we were talking about food desert. So that you have a grocery store that looks a little bit more like the picture on the right. You see that variety, and it's not just canned or boxed or packaged foods. It is fresh, whole foods. So increasing that food availability. The second part is, you know, what goes into your garden. A lot of gardeners are very interested in knowing how their food was grown and what had gone into it. So again, we've got some pictures here. You know, used to, you go to the general store and you had that direct contact with the person that was selling it. You could ask questions. You had that, like I said, involvement, that communication, open communication with that person. Anymore, if you go to the grocery store, you don't, you just pick it up and go, right? So urban farms can help people be more mindful of maybe what goes into their garden and know for exactly what was put into it. You can pick those at peak harvest. So we talk about food miles in the horticulture department. In urban ag, we've got a couple of new classes that we've introduced this semester, and food miles is a big one. So if we look through the grocery store, and you know, some of that produce, the fresh vegetables were maybe grown in California or Georgia or Florida, and it was put on a truck. Let's say tomatoes, for example. They're picked green from mechanization, and we put them on a truck and we gassed them on the way to Indiana. And, you know, they ripened on the way. They then sit in a grocery store for a couple of days before you purchase them, and then maybe sit in your own refrigerator for a couple of days before you eat them, or maybe even you throw them away because you've waited too long. So you've lost a lot of that nutrient content within those food miles that it's traveled. If you have a garden in your backyard or a community garden nearby, you can pick it at peak harvest. So you have all of those nutrients that those plants were intended to give you. You have increased physical activity, shoveling, raking, moving the wheelbarrow around. You are physically active in an event. So that will help with your body to be more active, like the doctor wants you to be, more so now. So not just sitting in an office. You have a chance to, I'm going to say, get away. Sometimes you can go to your garden and just think. You don't have to be doing anything that's just real complicated. Maybe you're just watering the garden. Maybe you're just planting. Maybe you're just pulling weeds. But in that garden, you can reset your mind. Think what happened. How can you reflect on what that day did? How can you reduce your stress and relax just for a little bit? So just get away. Try new foods. Also through this mechanical harvesting that we've started to do within the food system, we've lost, like he said, some of those varieties because it's easier to pick them. You have to have a carrot with a strong top so that when the machine pulls it out the carrot and not just the top. So we've lost some of those varieties. So you can pick what plant you want to grow. You can try new foods. You can cook with new things. There's some pretty cool vegetables and fruits out there. So be creative. Just explore those foods. it's also very rewarding. You can see the fruits of your labor. So just to see the plant go from maybe seed to plant to flower to harvest, or maybe just from plant to flower to harvest, you can step back and you can say, wow, that's pretty cool. That actually made some tomatoes or peppers for me that I could cook in my own kitchen. It's very rewarding. You can involve kids. It's very important that we have our kids more active outside. If you've ever heard of Richard Louv, he's got a couple of books. One in particular that I like is this Last Child in the Woods. He's coined the term nature deficit disorder. It's not like a medical diagnosis, but it's just something that he's come up with, that we spend too much time indoors, that our kids need to go outside and explore. It helps with increased creativity, responsibility, engages all their senses, encourages healthy eating, and increased problem solving. If those kids are out there watching those plants grow, they're probably going to be curious enough to eat them. And so we can start at an early age of have them eating fresh, new things that they haven't tried before, and seeing how it's grown. And they're just as surprised and impressed as we are. Some of the gardening challenges maybe we've touched on already, mainly soil concerns, that you could check the soil if you were growing in the soil, that previously there wasn't anything contaminating it. A lot of times in the cities you can find lead, maybe from lead paint from a building that was previously there, leaded gasoline that may have been around, but and other heavy metals. Maybe some concrete in your soil. So knowing what was previously there on the soil, if you're going to be growing in the ground, that you do some research. And then if not, I guess you can always grow above ground. You can always grow in containers, like those crates that we saw earlier this morning. Sometimes water availability is a problem. Being in a city, there's not a place where there's water hookup. So maybe you just have to rely on the rain. But water availability could be a problem. Urban conditions, we also talked about a little bit this morning. Some pollution in the city, because there's more cars in the city, so it's going to be a little more polluted, lots of more people. And there's a microclimate, which could be to a benefit, but also can be a concern at the same time. Managing weeds, I think from the most of the gardeners that I've heard from just this year, managing weeds is their struggle. And it's hard to keep up with those weeds. It really is. So using a cover crop or a mulch of some type, we use straw to help suppress the weeds, or even if you just pull the weeds and let them lay as a mulch, then that helps too. And I think that's the reason why a lot of gardeners maybe stop their garden after they have started, is because of the stress of the weeds. So again, just try and use some sort of mulch or cover crop to help with that. Labor needs, especially in an urban community garden, like you said earlier, being a one-man show, so that's sometimes the case in an urban farm. You need some help to get those gardens harvested and planted and weeded and just managed overall. So you can be creative and use volunteer work, or if you have some curious kids nearby that want to say, hey, let's see what's going on over there and help you. Just finding that labor need is important. So every situation is different. And there are several ways that you can be creative and use each situation to your advantage, be creative and find a solution for each problem. So there are a couple of gardens that I've visited and worked with before. I'm going to show you a picture here. So this is Fresh Way Farms. This is Martinsville, Indiana. It's kind of hidden away from the normal path there in Martinsville, but Greg Marlette has been going into schools. He's put some aquaponic systems in elementary schools nearby and helps them manage it so that the kids can see the system up close and personal. Invites them out to his place there. You can see he has a small aquaponics system himself, but then also the picture on the bottom, he's got a very large outdoor in-ground garden too. And he's got just diverse plantings. He uses some plants for pest resistance, as well as, he's got some scarecrows that help manage with the birds. He's got creative fencing on the side. He's got plants. There's a plant that he has, I forget the name of it, but you can use the seeds to create necklaces. The seeds actually have a hole in the middle. You can put a needle and thread through and use it for necklaces and bracelets for kids. So pretty cool. He has a mobile garden, a mobile rain garden that he takes around to show kids again on this trailer that he can take anywhere he goes and show the kids the full system. So that's Fresh Way Farms in Martinsville. Focuses mostly on education. It was a nonprofit and has just the last year converted over to a for-profit business. Seton Harvest was one that when I started learning about urban agriculture myself, I went to visit. I did a master's class that talked about urban agriculture and had to visit a farm myself. So I worked at Seton Harvest for a day and got to know a lot about the farm and how it works. This is run by a bunch of sisters in Evansville, Indiana. And they are very mindful of what they do to that land and how they garden. They have a certain way of doing things. They have some raised beds. They have mostly in-ground farming. And one of them had, when I talked to them, she said, they have a bucket of fish meal that they spray on the plants for fertilizer. And she said, you can just see the plants. They're happy whenever we come around with that backpack full of fish meal to spray them with. So very cool operation. They've got a twilight dinner. You can see up there on the right where they have music and they have beverages and a meal that has been created from the produce from the garden. So that you can have that sense of community and enjoy the evening with locally grown produce. They have looked into hydroponics. That was when I was leaving, they were getting a hydroponics system started. So they have more year-round produce there in Evansville. And what I thought was interesting here, they are certified naturally grown, but they have open gardens. So whoever gets the produce can have an opportunity to work off some of the produce that they receive by donating their time to the garden. And that way they can see how the garden runs and what is put into the garden so that they can receive the produce that they do. So that's part of their farm shares. Pretty cool operation. And the last one I just wanted to share with you here is my own. We're here in southern Indiana, rural southern Indiana. As you can see corn out the back of the greenhouse. But this is Greenfins. This is my family here that we've started this business. We haven't got it started up completely, but we are about a month away from adding fish and water to the system. So just knowing that there is a need locally and trying to address some of those needs by creating our own little garden in our backyard. So there's my contact information, cell phone or office phone and email. If you have any questions, just let me know.
Thank you, Jennifer. I find it interesting, this certified naturally grown. Can you tell us more about that? That's a new term to me. I'm a little familiar with organic certification. What is that?
Sure. So certified naturally grown is just maybe a step down from organic. We're looking into that for our own aquaponics. They have different sections of certified naturally grown. So they have an aquaponics, a flower gardening, a vegetable garden, so on and so forth. And you just, the application is quite long. You fill it out explaining how you manage your system, your farm. And you have a list of approved and prohibited items or things that you can use. So similar to the organic certification, but it's not quite as tedious. So you pay, I think it's a suggested donation to become certified naturally grown, as well as fill out the application. And then I think it's yearly that you still have someone come out and look at your system. And they're also certified naturally grown, so they can approve your system too. So it's just a step down from organic, but still using the same practices.
So what questions do you have for Jennifer and Nate? Let's go on a little farther. Or anything you guys want to add, Jennifer and Nate, that we're looking at?
I'm sorry if I missed it, Jennifer, but did you say the certified naturally grown requires annual like renewal, or is it a one-time or periodic?
I know they come whenever you start it up, but I was pretty sure that it was periodically after that they still come and check your system, because you still have to have the records, but it's not quite as strenuous as the organic certification.
So I assume you have to get a certifier or a business that will do the inspections and follow up on the paperwork?
Yes. Yeah.
I see Kevin Allison has added a no-tillgrowers.com here. I assume that's in the response to how do you get rid of the cover crops? I guess Kevin's also going to be on with us next month from the Marion County Saltwater Conservation District. So the topic then is coffee and tillage on September 21st, 2021. Again at 8:30 at this site. We'll be talking to them. Jennifer, on your hydroponics or your aquaponics, I guess it is, you haven't added the vegetable component yet. What is your goal on that? To for your own family or to market fish? What are you looking for?
And so when we get the system up and running, it's going to be a slow start. We're going to add 1 fish tank a month for the next 6 months. And we're going to have tilapia. So after that 6th month, the first tank should be harvestable. So it's going to take about that long to be able to get the system completely up and running, and slowly add lettuce is what we're going to focus on originally, and then probably move on to other produce. But yeah, so we thought about farmers markets, but then also donating some to the local pantry for the students here at Vincennes University, and then also maybe into the school system. At maximum capacity, that the system should be able to produce around 100 heads of lettuce a day. So we need to be able to have a place to put it. So we're looking into the school system and a couple of local restaurants too.
Very nice.
My husband is a fisheries biologist, so that's the only reason why we're going aquaponics instead of in the ground, and we're on some pretty sandy soil, so we're gonna grow above ground.
Doesn't seem like a fisheries thing would be highlighted in Indiana, is there?
Right. Right. We're gonna give it a whirl.
Yeah. So, Naeem, can I ask another question to you? Heavy metals and so forth, soil testing, what have you done on that respect, and what do you do in the future? Is there a way to remediate levels?
Yes, we fortunately didn't have levels in I guess all of our levels at the site were below what's considered direct safe contact concentrations. The main effort in Detroit is to essentially bury and neutralize exposure to dust from soil contamination. The two main arguments is the effort of pulling it out worth the time and cost? And once you pull it out, what do you do with the waste? So it seems like the most kind of ecologically sound thing, which has been done at a few farms around the city, is if people want to grow in ground and don't necessarily want to build up on top of the soil, they'll often have a bulldozer push the top 10, potentially more than 10 inches to the margins or the edge of the garden and create a berm or a swale. And then they'll bring in compost and soil to rebuild where that area was, and then just mulch and on top of that. And then on the swale, plant perennial native plants or something like that, and not use it for vegetable production. And then that prevents erosion and kind of at least contains most of the contaminants in the swale indefinitely. Yeah, I would say the other thing that farmers have done is essentially bring in tons of wood chips and just start a new level on top of the contaminated soil. So bringing in 8 to 12 inches of wood chips and then putting compost and mulch and soil amendments on top of that. And then essentially root vegetables and all other plants are growing so far from the contaminated area that the plants themselves aren't absorbing heavy metals or petrochemicals, and the dust from the ground is coming from what was added to the site rather than the originally contaminated soil surface. But it seems like most research indicates that a lot of plants, when they are contaminated, are getting contamination more so from dust than absorption through their roots. And the primary way to minimize human exposure is to reduce dust and erosion from contaminated sites rather than removing it. So it's kind of like they're here to stay, but they're not here to stay in a dangerous way. It's just something we need to be comfortable with having as a part of the landscape.
So Jennifer has, Joelle has a question here. What types of mulch are suggested for weed suppression? You or Jennifer?
Jennifer, I'm going to defer to you if you'd like to go.
We usually use straw in our home garden. I know there's probably others that you can use, even just the regular bark mulch, not colored or dyed, but then also I've had cover crops, that you can use for that too. So I usually use straw, but I'm sure there's others.
Yeah, we use a paper mulch at our site, and I think I can find a photo to share relatively quickly. Paper mulch, there aren't too many manufacturers of it, so it becomes a bit cost prohibitive if you're just buying a few rolls and having them shipped across the country. But one thing we try to do is order bulk with multiple local growers and then kind of just split the cost. And the paper mulch is essentially, I found a photo loading. You roll the paper mulch out, and then you can either cut transplants into it or cut it in a way where the paper mulch sits between a row of crops that may have been direct sowed. Share screen. So in this photo, we're growing strawberry transplants in this paper mulch. The mulch itself breaks down by the end of the growing season, so it essentially turns to soil. And in the meantime, from the time you lay it out to the time it decomposes, it's suppressing weed beneath the mulch. The paper mulch is also water permeable and air permeable, so it doesn't limit circulation or infiltration of water and air. And it's essentially net zero minus the shipping cost of getting it to your site. We found that really effective, a little more eco-friendly than plastic mulch. Most of us are tired of plastic everything. So plastic mulch is also super effective for keeping weeds down, but it is a fossil fuel based technique. And you can buy the paper mulch in 3 to 4.5 feet widths, and then the rolls themselves can go from 100 to 300 feet. But we found that to be pretty effective if you're comfortable taking on those costs. Besides that, I think straw, shredded leaf can be useful if you have access to those. But I think depending on the crop that you're growing, almost all mulches and straw, I guess any mulch, if you load it on heavy enough, keep weeds down, but we don't often have the capacity to load on 6 to 8 inches of mulch around our plants. But the paper mulch is, you essentially eliminate the ability, except for around where the transplants are planted, for weeds to come through that.
We had quite a few comments on mulch. That leaf mulch from the city leaf, paper mulch that you talked about. Cashandcarrypaper.com must be a place to get paper rolls. That's cool.
I bought Arbico, which is, I think, based in Arizona, pretty far away.
Or Uline, I've used that for other things already. They have a lot of.
Yep, I think Home Depot and Lowe's probably sell a type as well. Arbico, you can order. We bought maybe 10 rolls our site. So depending on how much space you have, I think Home Depot usually has a 3-foot roll by 50 feet. So that might suffice for a lot of folks.
Maybe that's a teaser for our next month, our September 21st one, when we talk about coffee and tillage. We have our coffee and tillage.
I have a quick question. I've been aware that I guess Detroit's one of the ones that cities I've heard of that has been more into the urban edible forests. And I know you presented that. But then I've also heard about is it Hans Farm? Is he just, yeah, is he just doing, is it edible foods or is it just a woodland tree?
Just woodland.
Okay.
He would say, well, the business would say it's for lumber, but locally it's generally believed to be a land grab, meaning he simply purchased all the land and planted maple and oaks on it in the short term, just to cut them down and turn it into something else when the property values are really high. But I will give them credit and say Hans Farm's original plan was to do some type of novel, large-scale urban agriculture project, but for political and social reasons, they were not permitted to do that. So they essentially resorted to converting thousands of lots, I would say close to 80 to 100 acres, into just rows of maple and oak trees spaced 4 to 8 feet apart.
Yeah. I've seen that trailer documentary.
Land grab.
Yeah. And just curious because I thought maybe he would do the edible forest too, but.
Mm-hmm. Well, essentially, they were able to plant tens of thousands of trees that all they have to do is mow in between them. And over the next 20 years, that's the primary responsibility, is just landscaping. So it would have been a much more intensive, cumbersome process to worry about pest and harvest and processing and pruning and all the responsibilities of edible tree management.
And I guess a goal here at Vincent's University of Mine is to have a garden that students can go to, whether it's, fruit trees or a vegetable garden or herb garden, or even just a flower garden, just to have that here for the students to pick from and enjoy. But it's harder to do than it is to talk about and want. But that's very cool. I like your farm. So I'm hoping to have something similar to that soon, if I can talk everybody into letting me have that here on campus.
Yep, baby steps every week.
I know Purdue has one. They have a student-led farm on their campus or outside their campus, and we have Purdue faculty here at VU that we have started that sustainable foods and farming systems here. That's the major that they take there at Purdue, to have that student-led farm, and they're doing some pretty cool things there too. And definitely the produce goes right back to the students.
Yeah, it's always helpful when it's a student-led initiative backed by the institution. That's what it sounds like.
So today we have a number, quite a few other viewers that have gardens, urban gardens, and other things. Would any of you like to come on, like Jan Young or some of the others, and fill us in with what you guys are doing, how it fits?
Hi, everybody. I'm Jane, and we have an incubator farm. So it's a business incubator. It's an urban farm. It's about 2 or 3 blocks from downtown New Haven, which is a small town right next to Fort Wayne. And we are working with the refugee population, specifically Burmese refugees. And a lot of those folks were originally farmers in their country of origin, and now they've come here and mostly worked in manufacturing, but they would really love to get back into agriculture. And so I offered to help them do that, and we got access to a 10-acre field. About probably 9 of it is tilled, and it's divided into half-acre plots. And so they're growing vegetables and selling them. We recently started, maybe 5 weeks ago, started a market specifically for the Burmese locals to be able to buy the produce. I've got a neat little video, just over 1 minute. If you'd like, I can share my screen and show the market from just a couple of days ago. Are you interested in that?
Yes, please go ahead. That'd be great.
Okay. So that was just on Sunday, and we're EBT capable, so we can take the food stamp cards, and we're part of St. Joe Community Health Foundation's Double Up program. They got a big nutrition incentive grant, so we're able to offer half price for all the vegetables. So Sunday, just a couple of days ago, we sold almost $6,000 worth of vegetables almost $8,000 worth of vegetables that you saw all that bounty on those tables. That all that was grown on our 9 acres by the student farmers.
I think when we visit there, one of the most interesting things is the variety of vegetables, not the typical grown in Indiana. Can you fill us in on some of the variety?
Yeah, we're learning a lot. Those of us that are born here in America are learning a lot from these folks. They really know how to grow things. The things they don't know are things like the IRS and the food safety, and so we do a lot of education with those kind of things. But the variety that is popular among the Burmese population, for example, squash vine terminals, they cut the last 18 to 24 inches off of a squash vine, or a gourd vine. They grow gourds to eat too, and they sell those in a bundle, and they're very popular. They make soup out of them. Also, things like eggplants, they typically don't ripen. They sell them underripe while they're still green. They're very, very popular. And a lot of other things like bitter gourds and bottle gourds, There are just a lot of vegetables that we're not familiar with. You saw in the video, big piles of leafy greens. Those are, I think they call that water spinach. That's very popular. But they're just selling like crazy, especially, when we offer the big discounts from the double up, and that market is set up right next door to a very large apartment complex that's probably 98% Burmese, low income. So they have the EBT food stamp cards, and it's just a huge unmet market demand that we're able to fulfill. And it's, wildly popular. And I think it's really going to be able to launch businesses for some of these folks that are in our program and learn how to do the business end of things. But really, they just needed some English speakers to be able to do things like set up, get permission to set that market up there. It's on the grounds of the League for the Blind and Disabled, which is right next to that large apartment complex. And, they just needed people to open doors like that. We have a food hub that's a for-profit agricultural cooperative that is under contract to manage the farm and to run the market. So the food hub being, in the business of selling and distributing food, then we were through there able to get the food stamp or EBT capable for sales, which are nonprofit, which is doing the project. A nonprofit would never be able to do that. They're not going to give, capability of accepting food stamps to a nonprofit. You have to be a grocery store to be able to take food stamps. So, it's the important partnership between the nonprofit and the for-profit agricultural cooperative food hub that really makes these things possible.
Yes, thank you, Jan, for sharing that. That was great.
You're welcome. I'm pretty impressed myself.
Are there any other questions out here? Anything you guys want to know? This has been a really informative day. Okay, I think we'll move to the end of this then, and I want to remind you of our next coffee and tillage on September 21st, 2021 at 8:30 again in the morning. The links will be available at the Allen County swcd.org. It's Allen County, Indiana. There's a lot of Allen counties around here. And that'll be with Brian Musser, NRCS District Conservationist. He's actually in Adams County right now in Decatur, and Kevin Allison from Marion County SWCD. So that'll be an interesting one also. We can hear about tillage or not as we move on. So thank you, everyone. This has been great.
Thank you guys.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Naeem and Jennifer. And this will be available. It's being recorded. So when Joelle gets this up, it'll be available at our website also, or a link to it.